Hello everyone, my name is Edgar Villa. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a certified addiction counselor. I am executive director of Crossroads Recovery, and today we have a special co-host with me. His name is
Rami Murhi.
Rami is actually a master level family therapist intern and a certified addiction counselor, correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. He's an addiction therapist and behavior therapist. And today we're going to be talking about an important topic out there. It's cravings. And one of the things to understand is cravings is a part of recovery. It's a symptom of this recovery process. And sometimes we don't look at that. Sometimes there's a shame that comes along with having to think of this as something's wrong with me. I'm having these thoughts. I'm having these physical sensations when it comes to cravings. And just know that cravings, it's a natural process of this whole recovery process. And some people ask me, how long does this last? It could last 30 seconds. It could last minutes. And sometimes it seems like it lasts forever. And when do they come? They have a mind of their own. They can come whenever they want. So today you can understand what are cravings, how to change them, understand biologically what's going on with your family or yourself. And today, Rami and I are going to be talking about these aspects when it comes to cravings and urges. And you'll be given a really great in-depth program about what are cravings, so understanding family members and how to tackle this myth about if you have cravings, you're regressing or you're in the relapse mode. Just because you're in craving does not mean you're in relapse mode. Just because your family member's in craving doesn't mean they're in relapse mode. It's really important to understand and take away and get rid of ourselves of all the myths when it comes to cravings. So today we have a really great program for you, and hopefully you enjoy it and very educational. One of the things that I've noticed is that before in the DSM-4, which is Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders that we all use as clinicians, is that cravings was not part of this when it came to describing addiction. It wasn't even there. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, they just added it into the DSM-5, and I think it's very crucial too, because adding that into the DSM-5, it takes a very different approach into having somebody else with their cravings to come along and to be acknowledged for having the cravings themselves, because it wasn't in there before in the DSM-4, and this just being added as an addition gives them an acknowledgement of, hey, this is something wrong. This is something that's being acknowledged by the Diagnostic Statistical Manual and how it's being approached for us to be recognized for having cravings. This happens.
And I mean, that's a good point, because one thing that I've noticed with the DSM-5 that they did this time around was that they actually added symptoms, and they took away the legal aspect part of this condition and really recognize it more as a chronic illness that it actually is. And like any chronic illness, you're going to have certain symptomology, certain symptoms, and one of them is cravings. So it's going away from the myth of legal, kind of the legal aspect of it, but recognizing, no, this is a condition that one of the symptoms is cravings.
Yes, one of the symptoms is cravings, and as people go through these symptoms and have these cravings, they have to recognize that when they have them, they're completely normal, and most addictions will go through these and have them periodically. So that's most important. Having the symptoms that go along and things that happen for the cravings are most important, for them to understand that this is going to happen. You really can't break it down any different, because as an addiction, you're going to have cravings along the way somewhere or another. And
that's a really great point. I like the way you say it's just going to happen. You're going to have a craving. And actually, I believe the NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, and other SAMHSA themselves, these national research bodies that when it comes to addiction, they actually have done brain studies, and I believe that they've shown that their brain gets activated with these responses it's totally out of their control. It just happens. So today you're going to be learning, why is my brain being activated and what's activating it, and normalize this for you. When I mean normalize, I mean, like you mentioned, they're going to happen, and not be ashamed about it. Learn to talk about it with pride, that you're becoming aware of what's going on with you, because once you're aware of what's going on with you, you could stop it. And craving is something that sometimes people don't want to discuss. I know I'm having groups, and I ask in the introduction, did you have any cravings? A lot of individuals say, I had no cravings, I had no thoughts. And that for me sometimes is hard to understand, because that goes against what we think cravings are sometimes.
You're absolutely right, Edgar. And also what I see in the groups as well is that when people go through and they say, how strong are your cravings? Are they a 10 on 0 to 10? And most of them will put 0 or 1. They don't recognize how strong those cravings can really be for them, or how long they're going to last, so that they can acknowledge the cravings and what the strength of them are for them to not relapse or to not have that issue of going back into the drugs.
You know, you bring up a good point. Is sometimes they will give you lower numbers, and I wonder if it has to do with maybe if there's some thinking that if I say I have a high craving, does that means I'm really not in a good recovery process, or I'm not implementing my skills? I think there's some type of level of a misunderstanding when it comes to cravings, and even people that have been in recovery for quite a while sometimes.
Yes, very true. And sometimes in the beginning stages of withdrawal, they also don't know where their cravings are coming from, and they also don't know how strong they are, but they fail to recognize them within themselves. And rather than to recognize the strength and how long they go and how big they are and what they mean to them, they often minimize them and not, take a full effect of what's going on with them.
That's a very good point, and that brings me to some hard evidence here. And some of the hard evidence suggests that exposure to stress, exposure to cues. When I mean cues is when you're driving down the street and all of a sudden you see maybe a place where you used before, without you wanting it, a craving is going to come in. It might not be very intense, like a 10 or 8, but there's a thought that's going to come in. When you're walking down the hallway and buying your bread, and next door might be the wine, you're going to have a craving. And one of the things we look at is that individuals would have this chronic illness, which we call addiction, a substance use disorder, you're actually going to have a natural craving for this. It's like asking a diabetic, don't think about sugar. Don't crave your cookies. And we don't shame the diabetic. We don't tell them you're not taking your insulin correctly. You're not doing a good program. No, we don't shame the diabetic because of that. We understand this is a natural process that goes along with a chronic illness. And across the boards with heroin, with meth, with alcohol, even with cigarettes, even with other compulsive behaviors, you're going to have cravings. Even gamblers have these cravings that we're talking about. And studies have shown the more stressed you are, the more these things are going to happen. Also, if you're around those environments, that's going to tend to happen.
You're absolutely right. When it comes down to the stress and everything that comes along with it, that type of anxiety is going to lead towards some type of coping towards running back towards the cue of, hey, how did I go back to where I was? How did I fix when I was feeling that the last time I was feeling that way? How can I do it better? The cues are going to be the things that they see that make hey, you know what, when I did this or when I saw that place, that's what made me feel better, so I'm going to go off and do that again. That's where it comes down to. It comes down to them using the same type of addiction pattern of the coping mechanisms of the drug use, of running back the same way to deal with those cues, and the reminder of the pleasure-seeking principle that comes in and gives them that good feeling of, hey, we felt good at this time.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up a good point. You said the pleasure aspect of the brain. And if you look at the screen that we have above here, is that it shows you where the brain does. If you notice, there's all this place of involvement here, and where it has a reward memory and all that pain section, the middle part of the brain, that's called the midbrain part of the brain. And what studies have shown that this is a part of the brain gets activated with drug usage. And what takes place is with heroin, alcohol, cocaine, and nicotine is that's a reward pathway. So our brain makes the connection between that, and every time we use it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So the amygdala and hypothalamus is the part of the brain that actually recognizes that and attaches it to emotional memory. And so you're right, whenever we have these pleasures, it's going to connect to our brain. It's something that scientifically has been proven already that these cravings are going to come naturally, and that's what's one of the symptoms of a chronic illness. And I keep saying the chronic illness because the chronic illness is brain-based. It has a biopsychosocial component to this. It means that it affects all these different spheres, and because of that, what's going to happen. And one of the things we're looking at this at a biological level is the cravings.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things on that chart was the little middle part there where the cocaine and the heroin and the alcohol and everything comes in for the pleasure-seeking principle. What happens is that when it comes in, you see the cues, and your brain will actually produce a chemical that will actually make you have that sensational feeling of reminding you that, hey, we did this at one time. We felt good. We felt better. And that's how we're going to do it. So when your brain produces that chemical, that remembrance of what it used at one time to feel good when things are bad, then it makes a big difference for them to go out and use again.
And that's a really good point. And one of the things I want to say is there's a dopamine rush that happens. And think of units of dopamine of 50 or 100. 100 is typically a unit, say, is that you have you get a promotion, you buy a new house, that'll give you like 100 units of dopamine rush. And we know if you smoke, you get 450 units of dopamine just rushing to your brain. If you smoke marijuana, you get 600 dopamine units. And if you use, I believe heroin is, I think like 900 units of dopamine. And if you use meth, it's 1100. So it's like 11 times stronger than your best day ever when it comes to this. So naturally, you're going to have some cravings for this drug that makes you feel so good. And it's really important to recognize that if you're having cravings, it's not you're failing your program or that you're regressing, you're going back. Remember that it's just a part of the recovery process, part of the chronic illness. Family members, please remember that and have an open discussion and ask your family members, are you having any cravings today? Do you have any urges today? Because that is a natural process. If they're able to talk about it, they're going to be able to express and put a plan. It's when it's not talked about that it becomes a problem. So I encourage everyone out there to say, yes, I'm having a craving today. You don't have to talk about the craving. You can say, I'm having a craving. It's very intense today. Keep me busy to do an activity. It's when you deny it that becomes a problem. It's when you say, I'm not having this, and eventually you end up using a few days later or a few weeks later, because it's a progression, as we talked about in the last episode. But so remember that. One of the things we want to do today, Rami, is let everyone know if you're having a craving, it's okay. It's definitely okay. It's what's not okay is not talking about it or not acknowledging it. Because what happened, this is a symptom of this chronic illness that we have. And it's really important that we get this across today to all the viewers out there. Talk about your cravings. Ask about it without no shame or no punishment. Because one of the things is that's out of their control.
Not only is that out of their control, but in reality, they should be more present towards where their cravings are coming from and be in the moment with their cravings. They want to be in the present with their cravings so they can learn to handle the cravings as it comes along and say, hey, I'm in a craving. I'm having a craving right now. I really, really want this. But at the same time, what can I do differently so that I don't have to address the craving in a point where I'm going out to use again? How can I avoid the craving technique of not using and finding something different in order to let the feeling pass?
And that's a good point, because one thing I do want to get across, think of this of a craving like this, just to get a different perspective here. Think of craving as my brain's telling me I want some more dopamine. So think of a craving as a built-in protective system that lets you know, my brain needs dopamine. So what can I do to give it dopamine? I could run, gives it dopamine. I could eat, I could socialize. All that gives you units of dopamine. So think of a craving as a little protector, a little system inside of you that says, something's going on that your brain needs more dopamine. And that's one good way to kind of help individuals notice that this is okay, this is part of it, this is just a protector side. So one of the things we ask individuals in recovery, especially in Crossroads Recovery, or just in other treatment centers is, we recommend to eventually stop smoking, because we know that smoking gives you a dopamine rush. So when you are in relapse mode, when you might want to be using, the first thing you pick up is a cigarette because you're looking for the dopamine rush. So one of the things to consider is think of this craving as an indicator, a protective factor you have built into you. Instead of being a negative, it's a built-in protective factor that says, my body needs more dopamine, so what's going on with my body that I need to take care of it?
And in cigarettes itself is a very big issue of, a lot of people smoke in rehabs, but at the same time, when they're smoking, the smoking is still giving them the satiate. It's also giving them the rush. It gives them that little high feeling that keeps them going. But at the same time, if you don't quit that, if you don't stop smoking, you're going to still have the ability to continue on having that feeling of, hey, the cravings are still here. I'm still feeling a rush. Something has to change.
And one thing I hear a lot is like, you took everything away from me. Can I still have my cigarette and my coffee? And it's up to you. We're just here to give you information. We're not saying stop smoking or stop other things as far as that. We're giving you information to understand that these are protective factors. And one more thing about cravings is defining what is a craving. If you look up on the board, it's really important to understand what is actual craving. And according to Marlett and Horvath, 1985, it states that a craving is straight out of their book. It says physical arousal, emotional arousal. It's like a need and a desire of wishing to experience the high or a relief. So it's kind of the wanting aspect of it. So it's really important is the desire and need of the relief or the high itself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has to do with them wanting to feel good and feel better with the high and the relief. The relief of what, right? So it's got to be the relief of something, and it's the relief of stress, the relief of life stressors. It's the wanting to get high of the desire to feel better from the pain that they're going through, the stressors that they're happening in their life. They want that high, that desire. That's the physical arousal and the emotional arousal and all of that coming together for them wanting and having the need and the desire to get high again.
And then there's another thing we want to look at is when you separate cravings and urges, it's really important to look at that cravings is the physical aspects, emotional aspect of wanting the high or relief or of the pain. The urges are more of the behavior compulsion. It's the action. It's doing something to obtain that particular drug or to particular high. So that's something in doing. So let's separate the craving from the urge, because sometimes a lot of individuals that I've come across pile them together when in reality there are two different things going on. Craving is wanting to do it, physical arousal, and then the urge is the desire, the behavior attached to that craving itself.
And the craving is going to be having the feeling of wanting to feel good and get high again. The urges is going to be you finding yourself going to the drug dealer's house or going to the place where you pick up or going to some place where you're going to find a way to use again. That's the urge. The urge is sometimes when you have that feeling, and then I've heard a lot of the addicts they say, hey, you know what? I didn't want to get high again. I was trying to fight it in my mind, and then sooner or later I found myself at the dealer's house, and that's where the urges come in.
And that's a really good point. And a really good, interesting thing to understand too is some individuals, they stop their drug of choice, which would be meth, heroin, whatever it might be, Xanax, and then they go over into eating a lot. Well, what happens, they're not recognizing is that they might have a craving for something, they're not aware of it, and then they'll eat to get a dopamine rush. So sometimes that's how fast you could switch from one drug to another or a behavior, because that urge, that eating is going to give you a dopamine rush. And one thing to understand is when you are switching from one drug to another, you're probably not recognizing your craving, you're not probably recognizing your urges. You're just seeing it, well, I'm just doing the automatic pilot. And one of the things we want to do is get you out of the automatic pilot to a conscious pilot. Someone that says, no, stop, think I'm having a craving here, my body feels uneasy, and learn to recognize, and then make the switch over to more healthier, conscious choice, which is working out, seeking social support, whatever there might be, instead of relieving pain, trying to address your pain in a very healthy manner.
And in context, it has to do a lot with substitution. What are you substituting it for? Are you substituting for something healthy with an exercise or art or some type of hobby? You can have some type of relief or some anxiety relief. Most of it has to do with making it in a healthy boundary. Anything can be complicated. Like if you were to exercise too much, that could be an issue. Eating too much can be an issue. Everything has to be monitored to a sense where the urges are not so high overpowered that they become an impairment for your life as well. So substitution has to be good boundaries, and substitution has to be in a healthy state, something that's controllable and not going to have a withdrawal effect on you or an impairment in your life, such as drugs.
Mm-hmm. And I think we cover a lot of truth about cravings, which essentially that's what it talks about is that craving does not mean there's something wrong with the person. The craving does not mean that you want to resume alcohol and drugs. So that's a myth I want to clear. Very, very important to understand. Because you have a craving, it does not mean you want to use. If your family member, your loved one, your husband, your wife, whoever it might be that has addiction, just because they're having cravings does not mean they want to go use. A lot of people believe that because they have poor education of it. It just means that you have a physical reaction that you wanted to. Think about this. When you think of a lemon or a lime, all of a sudden, naturally, your body will start to naturally salivate. There's actually a behaviorist that studies on Pavlov, which is a researcher, a psychologist, that actually put a little bell with the dog. And every time he rang the bell, he associated with food, and the dog ate it. Eventually, after ringing the bell, took away the food, and the dog naturally became to salivate. So one thing you have to understand is this is a natural reaction that happens. So your body's going to have this craving whether you want it or not, because your brain is associated one with the other. So just know that that's because you have a craving doesn't mean nothing is wrong with you. You're a human being, and this is what happens to our brain when we expose it to a drug use over a period of time. You're naturally going to develop cravings.
And cravings itself is also part of it. And And you're right about the dog with the salivating. There is also other studies too where some people that have a lot of cravings and they say, hell, you know what, I have a lot of cravings. I don't feel like this is moving forward for my recovery. I feel like I'm getting worse, or I feel like I can't take it anymore. And they start to get a little hopeless. There was a theory from Bandura where he had a dog in a cage and it had electricity on the bottom. And as the dog got up and moved another square, it would shock him. Eventually, after the dog walked around so many times and got shocked, he decided to just lay down and get shocked anyways. He gave up. And that's something that you don't want to do with cravings. You don't want to give up just because you're having the cravings. You want to know that they're completely natural and that they're going to happen within the addiction. So that's the hopelessness that you want to avoid, because it's going to happen. So embrace it and work with it.
And it's important to recognize that some cravings are normal and quite common. And so that's what we're trying to let you know. It's okay to talk about this in your groups with your family members. That is a very common thing. When the cravings are strong, people seem to lose to reason objectively. What they found is when your cravings are really intense, you can't think critically sometimes because you're consumed by the obsessive thought of the using. So understand that's going to pass. It's like a wave that hits you. When it first hits you and you're at the beach, it hits you, it's going to be a strong pull. But if you fight that and you let it go, it's slowly going to dissipate little by little.
You'll also have some things where it becomes compulsive, where you're compulsively thinking about it, especially in the craving itself. You will have a little bit of compulsion. You'll start to think more and more and more and more about it, and you won't be able to let it go. The object is to let it go, and relax and let it go and embrace it a little bit and try to work your mind on something different, because if you work yourself into it, it's going to last longer and longer and longer, and you don't want to feed into your own cravings.
So in other words, they continue even though individuals try to suppress or abolish them. You're going to have these cravings. Just recognize this is a part of your recovery process, and there's nothing wrong with this. It just simply means that, hey, this is what's going on with me. And understand that eventually with time, the intensity of the craving and the frequency of craving, it's going to decrease. And there'll be periods where it comes back after a few years of sobriety or a few weeks of sobriety, depending on the stress level, all these factors that come into play, where you're at, who you're socializing with. So no, it comes and goes sometimes. And this is part of the chronic illness of addiction. Just understand this is something that just happens. Some people don't like to label it addiction. You don't have to label it addiction. You just have to know this is something that happens when you've used for quite a while and your body and your mind has physically been dependent on it. Just know that this is a natural occurring aspect of this process.
Rather than label it as addiction, I would say it's more part of the addiction, because labeling it the addiction is the wrong terminology, for one. And two, the cravings are not the addiction. The cravings are just part of the addiction and part of the process of going through to recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. And one of the things, if you want to learn more about understanding how this process works for you, we're gonna have you look at what is called a functional analysis. And what a functional analysis is you have noticed that in certain situations you use drugs and others you do not. And it's kind of baffling for some people sometimes. Drug use is orally behavior that is more likely to occur in certain circumstances, and in others it won't happen. So it's kind of baffling. How can I be able to manage this situation and not another one? Another thing that happens is it allows you to identify immediate causes for your use. So when you're doing a functional analysis, it helps you understand what's happening, what's making it more likely for me to actually use. This is one of the first steps if you're entering recovery to understand your behavior when it comes to drug using. Therefore, allowing to implement a plan, because if you don't know what's going on, you're not going to be able to put a plan together to prevent it, which we call a relapse prevention plan, or an emergency plan, or all-purpose coping plan that tends to happen. So this is a functional analysis.
The functional analysis is part of it shows the triggers, shows the thoughts and feelings, shows behavior, shows consequences that are positive, shows consequences that are negative. It lets you know that the trigger leads to thoughts and feelings, your thoughts and feelings lead to behaviors, and your behaviors lead to consequences. Also, if the behavior becomes repetitive, it can become a pattern, and you can have repetitive patterns of consequences. Most people that would go into that type of addiction, it becomes a spiral and it goes straight down the line. So labeling your triggers, finding out what the thoughts and feelings are behind them, is able to stop it before it leads to a behavior that's going to be bad, which you can change it to good, and you'll have the consequences that are positive rather than ones that are negative.
So one thing we're gonna break down is functional analysis for some make-believe individuals, and just to kind of show you how you will do this functional analysis on your own. You could grab a piece of paper, and, make 5 different boxes like you do here, and you could do this on your own. You could do this for your family member. So I'm going to walk you through how a functional analysis will look at 3 different incidents and how the consequences are built into this, and how to understand the thoughts and behaviors when it comes to this. So think of this. Steve comes over and asked me to go out. And Steve is my good, long friend that we've used alcohol and drugs in the past. He comes visit me after a whole year of not visiting me. He pops up. My thoughts are, sounds good, I'll go out. My behavior is, I'm gonna go out to the bar and get a drink with Steve. It's a good old friend. And we look at the consequences are, I have a blast. I have a really good time with him. We party, we drink, we catch up. The negative consequences is, I come home late and my wife is upset. My wife is nagging at me, telling me why I was up late, why I was doing that with Steve. I should know better. But without any judgment, you write this down. And what happens? A different trigger. Argument with Maria. She's angry because I drank, and I'm angry. Gotta get away. I have to go away from her. She's upsetting me. My behavior is I leave the house. Well, no direction. I'm just gonna leave the house because my therapist, my counselor said, take a time out, leave out of the house, but I didn't have a plan set up. There's no positive consequences, none. The negative consequences is a word that we technically sometimes use is, I don't feel really well about myself. I feel like SHIT, and that's what happens. And then another situation, a trigger that happens is Maria reminds me about my responsibilities. I get guilty, annoyed. Where does she go or get off telling me what to do? That's my thoughts and my feelings. So my behavior is I leave the house and drink, talk to the guys at the bar. And guess what the guys at the bar is telling me? They agree with me that she's a nag, and I actually feel better at this situation with these individuals. Then the consequences is I feel guilty. When I sober up, I start realizing what the reality of what happened and what I did. So the question to ask yourselves are, what set you up to use? What was your trigger? What was your situation? And studies have shown over the course of years is that inner conflict are the ones that are the stronger driving force to go out there and use, which is the negative emotions, the physical pains, the cravings, the urges. And I think number 1 cause is inner emotions, like guilt, anger, shame, the sadness. I think number 2 in the list, depending on the drug you're using, is cravings and urges. And then what were you thinking? What were you feeling? Really great in trying to understand is 1 sentence, 1 word for your emotion. What did you do? What positive thing happened? And what negative thing happened. So this is what you do in a functional analysis. All you're doing is you're just breaking down this process for yourself and looking what is the payoff value. What do I get out of using? What are my thoughts to set me up? So here in this functional analysis, if you take a look at it, we start recognizing certain things. And Rami, as we look at this functional analysis, you as an addiction therapist, addiction specialist, what would you point out to a client that when you do something like this, as far as triggers is concerned and cravings?
Well, what I would do is I would actually have them find out where their triggers are, where the cravings are. I would also have them write down the places they get them. Do I get them when I'm at church? Do I get them when I'm at my house? Do I get them when I go to a friend's house? Do I get them when I go to work? Where are the triggers happenings? Where are the cravings happenings? Where are the thoughts and feelings that are coming along with that? So I can pinpoint where I'm having it. Some people that are coming into addiction, that's to say, hey, I would never have cravings or thoughts or triggers that happen at church. I don't have them when I'm around my kids, but I have them either when I'm fighting with my wife, or I have them when I'm going out to work and I get in a big argument with my boss, or when I meet somebody that I know that I haven't seen for a long time, I'll have them. So these are the things that the people need to write down, is where are they having these triggers? How are these thoughts and feelings coming along to make their cues come along?
And if you have to take this functional analysis that we have in front of us, what would you point out to your clients if there was an imaginary client? What things would you tell them looking at this functional analysis? This pretend this functional analysis is an actual client. What would you point out to your clients?
Well, I would point out that there's triggers there. So if you can recognize your triggers and you can think of the thoughts and feelings when you're putting them down, to think about the thoughts and the feelings before you make a behavior moment. Because if you can make the right behavior moment and you can change the behavior moment from the thoughts and feelings, you can actually have a positive consequence rather than a negative one. So that's where it comes down to. It comes down to, is this a trigger for me? Am I having a craving? And what thoughts and feelings am I going through? Can I have a better thought and feeling about the behavior that I'm going to do? Or should I stop, think about it, and make a better choice from the mind that I'm coming from and make a good behavior instead?
So one thing I want to point out in this model here, the model of substance use with Soares, Aaron Beck, 1903 book, Cognitive Therapy of Substance Use, is just kind of understand how this works. Is you have a situation, could be either internal or external. It could be problems with wife, counselor, friend, coworker, laid off of work, fight, feeling sad, angry, lonely, what it might be. That's going to activate entrenched core beliefs. And what I mean entrenched means these deep inner beliefs we have about drug using and what it does. For example, some people say it really helps me relax, makes me feel better. Then that leads to automatic thoughts. Then that leads to cravings and urges. And that's what we're actually working on today. We're working on how to understand, how to normalize, how to manage cravings in our life. Because it's really important to understand that. Because eventually that's going to lead down to giving yourself a permission. Why is it okay in your own mind? I deserve it, I've been sober, whatever it might be for you. We all have permission beliefs about certain behaviors that we exhibit sometimes. Then that leads to going out there and picking up and using, and eventually into a relapse. So understand, this is a model, doesn't mean this is the model. This is a model that we use sometimes to help individuals understand where cravings fit into the relapse process or the cognitive process when it comes to relapse. And the things to look at is, there's 4 types of cravings. And some people say, what, I have 4 types of cravings? Because we don't think of breaking down cravings for ourselves. What's your been experience when you start educating people on the different types of cravings that they have?
Well, most people don't actually know there's 4 types of cravings, first of all. And second of all, some people don't really know what a craving is. They just know, hey, I'm feeling this way. I feel like I want to use. I'm stressed out. I'm feeling like I want to do something about it, and I don't know what that feeling is.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And some individuals don't understand that the reason you're having this type of craving is because it's a response to a withdrawal symptom. This is gonna when you're getting rid of your body of something, you're naturally gonna have cravings because your body's detoxifying from it. So one of the consequences of stop using, entering recovery, is you're gonna have cravings for your drug because your body physically needed it, or your body psychologically or emotionally needed this. So you're gonna have this type of craving, this intensity that you feel in your body and your brain. So understand that's one type of craving if you're going through withdrawals. Because if you could understand what type of craving you're having, you could understand what situation you're putting yourself in that's creating this particular craving itself. Another type of craving that we have is response to lack of pleasure. Have you experienced that in your profession?
Well, yes. The response to lack of pleasure is, hey, things are going boring right now. Things aren't happening for me. I don't have any more friends, or I'm not having fun. I can't go to the movie theaters anymore because I was always going there loaded, and now I don't go there anymore. So this type of lack of pleasure comes along with the cravings of being somewhere that you used to use all the time, and now maybe you want to go use again because that's the way you did it. That's the way you went there all the time. So if you don't have the point where you stop, are you really going to go back to that place and enjoy yourself? Or is there going to be a lack of pleasure that's going to say, hey, let's go back to where we were so we can go back to enjoying a movie?
A good point. And one thing to understand is when you're going through this process of craving is biologically your brain cells have shifted, have changed. Some of them have gone away or shriveled away, whatever you want to view this. They're not functioning how they're supposed to be functioning. So when that's going to happen, you're going to have a lack of pleasure in your own life. And typically that tends to happen anywhere between the 45 to 60 day, what we call the wall, is when your brain is trying to heal itself. And one of the consequences is not able to experience the pleasure. So when you watch a movie, when you do things with your family, you might not enjoy it as much. So this tends to happen to lack of pleasure. When you're highly stressed, a craving is going to come in. So just understand that when sometimes you can't experience pleasure early in recovery because your brain has been changed a little bit because of this chronic illness that we have. So one type of craving you're having is lack of pleasure, and understand that's what's going to happen. Another one that comes along is called the conditioned response to drug use. Have you experienced that sometime with some of the clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. So conditioned response to drug cues is almost like doing it without even noticing it. So Somebody who has been in the same spot, they're not going to think about wanting to use, but hey, they're there already. They're just going to go out and use, and that's the point in time where somebody says, you know what, I really didn't want to use. I just looked down and I was using, and that's the conditioned response. It's hearing the bell of, hey, this is the people we're here, and you salivating, you going right for it. So that's the conditioned response.
Another thing to understand is what the conditioned response is very important is that sometimes your old partners that you use with, sometimes having sex is a conditioned response, because sometimes we use sex and drugs at the same time, certain foods, certain street corners, certain billboards, certain avenues, certain emotions, certain words, certain people could trigger this to happen. So people ask, well, Edgar, I've been sober for 7 months. I'm having a lot of cravings according to the research, according to where I'm supposed to be. I shouldn't have that many. Well, that's the thing to understand, what type of craving you're having. Maybe you're not aware of it, but you're maybe surrounding yourself with a lot of individuals that is triggering that part of your brain, the memory part of your brain, to be activated, and it's something that's out of your control. And sometimes all it will take is to get away from people, places, and things, and then all of a sudden your cravings reduce. So if you're having a lot of cravings and you're trying to work a really good program, you have to start looking, maybe the people I'm hanging out with, maybe the areas I'm hanging out with, maybe these are things that are elevating my cravings. And you have to make a decision for your recovery to continue and grow is, this is not helpful. Maybe this is not for me. Maybe I have to change these people, places, or things that we talk about in recovery sometimes. And the last time is respond to hedonic desires. Want to tell a bit about that?
And hedonic desires are when somebody wants to feel even better than the way they're feeling. So if somebody's using and somebody says, oh, you know what, I go and get high, and then I need to go get high again. I need to keep using and keep using. Or they go out, they have a beer, and instead of just having a beer, they get another argument and they go out and have 5 beers. It's the desire to keep going on and using more than what they're using already.
And to add to that, that's a really good point. Another thought is that, hey, you're at a party, you're having 1 beer, let's kick in some little cocaine, let's do a little bit of meth to celebrate. Another thing is some people actually are at a party, or maybe they graduated from a program and they will go out and celebrate and drink, because that wasn't a drug of choice. But important to understand is complete abstinence, it's what ideal to put this chronic disease at bay and remission. So one of the things to understand is that the hedonic desire will be like, feel good, I'll make myself feel even better than this. So I feel happy. Imagine if I had a little bit of this, a little bit of rock, I actually be happier. And that's what the brain tries to trick us. That's where the addictive thing comes in. And understand, these are 4 different type of cravings that you might be having. There's probably a little bit more for. These are the 4 basic ones that we want to discuss today, is the withdrawal symptom ones, the lack of pleasure, the things are triggered by conditioning response, things that you did in your environment, and also people, places, or things. And also is you feel happy and you want to improve your state of mood. So these are 4 type of cravings you want to take a look at and see which one you're having of.
Also, I want to add to that, happiness can also be a really big craving trigger. Happiness can be, let's say if you're at a wedding, right? At a wedding, and then, I'm doing AA, I'm sober, I'm trying to stop. And you hit the wedding and it's a big celebration, you have a big party, any type of event like that, and then all of a sudden you decide, hey, everybody else is drinking, maybe I'll just have one to celebrate. That could be a big issue for that as well, to do more than what you expect.
And that's definitely true. So now you've identified what are your 4 type of cravings. We want to look at, to break it down a little bit more. So far we've covered with you and everyone here watching us is understand what a craving is biologically, what type of cravings you're having. The next we're going to move into is how long does it last for you? One of the things to look at, does it last seconds? Does it minutes? Does it last 1 hour or so? This is something to kind of look at. What has you been experienced working with people with the cravings?
Well, it can last seconds, minutes, or hours. And typically, the cravings usually last about 20 minutes for most of the people that I talk to. When the cravings come along, it's what do you do with the cravings? How do I get through them, and when will they last? When will they end? Well, you got to sit through them first of all, and second of all, you have to sit through till the cravings are completely gone. You don't want to try to get up and go somewhere or do something where the cravings are still there, because your behaviors may not be what you want. So if you can relax and wait till the cravings are done, then you'll have a better success rate of not doing anything while the cravings are lasting.
And one thing to look at is the good news is that, like you mentioned, intensity decreases and eventually go away. But one thing that I've noticed in my career is when I'm working with the cravings is there's certain individuals that when they last is 20 minutes or 30 minutes or hours at a time, sometimes when we break down the functional analysis or do the craving log, they start realizing that they're doing what we call in the field euphoric recall. When they start romanticizing the high, what they're doing is they're playing the tape as they were using. Because even when you play the tape through, when you think of getting high, your brain starts releasing dopamine. And so they get like a little miniature high of just thinking about it. They get the heart rush, the palpitations, and this kind of feels good sometimes, you know. And so one thing to understand, if your craving is lasting for a long time, for minutes at a time, you have to look at how am I maintaining this craving? Are you doing something? I had some individual, actually a lot of them say, Edgar, I'm having craving all day, every day, and they can't stop. I'm like, okay, well that's interesting. So what we know when it comes to treating obsessions is that what you run away from, you run into, the things you try to stop thinking, they come even more. It's like if I asked you right now and out there, stop and don't think of a pink elephant. Don't think of a pink elephant. Don't think of a plane. Don't think of a yellow gorilla eating a green banana. Stop thinking about it. Get rid of your head. Don't think about it. Sometimes you might not be able to get rid of it. So what we're saying is, let's confront it. Let's address it. Let's write it down. So what I do with a lot of the clients is I have them write down their cravings, like craving log. And all of a sudden they come back and they say, oh, Edgar, my cravings are actually very low, minimal. It's because what's happening is they're taking note of it, they're accepting it. And what they do in accepting it, they're getting control now of it. So there's a lot of different techniques that we're going to teach you today, or part of the show that's going to help you how to deal with these cravings that come for a very long time. And sometimes when you're having withdrawal cravings, that's where you're just going to have to write them out and keep yourself busy because they're going to bombard you. And some of the techniques I'm going to give you are not appropriate for the cravings of the withdrawal type, because that's something that's out of control physically is happening to you. When you go along, so that's why it's really important to understand what type of craving you're having, because the skill, the intervention we're going to give you or you're going to implement, it's going to be different. So that's what's really important to understand, what type and how long, because how long is going to tell me what are you doing that may be maintaining it, or who you're around and you might be maintaining it, because you might be working these skills, but then your next door neighbor is using, you know he's using, and you're going to keep being bombarded by these. Mm-hmm. So the next thing we're going to talk about is describe the craving. How does the craving feel for you? Want to give a few examples of what you've been told?
Well, from my experience, describing a craving would be more of a lot of heart palpitations, sweaty hands, shakiness, shaky hands, salivating from the mouth. All of these things are part of cravings, and the feeling of I need to use, or feeling of I need this, or I need it now, or I'm going to die without it. These are all feelings of the cravings, of feeling in need of something that you can't control.
So you have to ask yourself, what is craving like for you? How bothered are you by your cravings? How long does the craving last for you? How do you try to cope with your craving? So the first question is, how do you experience this craving in a variety of ways by different people? So it's going to be different for you than it is for myself. For some, it's going to be more physical, like you mentioned, a really good point is, I get a feeling in my stomach. And for some people, it might be my heart races. I start smelling it. It's a big common one that I hear. I want to go to the restroom. And it's all because your system is actually getting activated. Your central nervous system is getting activated, and you're releasing chemicals that your body wants to use it. Mm-hmm. And some people, it's more mentally, if you experience, they get this mental obsession, which is they tell themselves, I need it now, I can't get out of my head, it calls me. For some people, more emotionally, I get nervous, I am bored, I get lonely or sad. These are the emotional individuals, or I get angry. Some people are a little bit different. You know what I mean? Craving is not something that comes straight and narrow like we've been describing. It could come in different forms, different ways. It could be considered triggers. They could be considered cravings, depending how you're experiencing them. If there's like a physical component to it, what is emotional, you can start looking. Okay, this could be my trigger. This is my craving. So this kind of sometimes this is a craving is a very. It seems like a simple topic, but it's a very complex topic in itself.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out is also the mentally and the emotional triggers can also be at the same time. So you can have more than one. Mm-hmm. It's not just like you're going to have one and that's it. You're going to have more than one at the same time. You can have more than one separated times. But the fact is that you're going to have more than one or possibly both. You could just have one by itself or not. But you're going to feel something along the way for the cravings.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a very important point. Is sometimes you might be bombarded for all these types of cravings, and the more types you have, the intense it might feel. If you're having obsessive thoughts, you're having physical arousal, and you're emotionally up there also, your craving intensity might be like a 10. So whenever you have a craving really high, you want to look at what interventions you're going to be using to manage that craving. So yeah, it's a really good point, and something I didn't really think about, but that is really true. Mm-hmm. So you have to ask yourself, what is craving like for you? How is it for you out there? It's really important to break it down for yourself, because the more you could analyze it, understand it, the better you could manage it, the better you could explain it to other people, and the better you could explain it and manage it, the likely you're going to be is maintain yourself in sobriety and recovery, and less likely you're going to be to relapse. So just understand this is an important component to preventing relapse. So you have to look at the intensity. So the intensity for anyone in craving is going to depend on the duration of use, how long you've been using, the type of drug you've been using, how long you've been in recovery from drugs, and your own individual physiological components, with your own individual biological makeup. If you have any other heart problem, asthma, or whatever it might be, how your own immune system is. So all these are going to determine how bothered you're going to be by this craving. And look at the intensity craving on a scale of maybe 10 to 100. And people say, Edgar, why don't you use a 0 scale? I really don't like to use a 0 scale, because I know that when you have a craving, there's some level of intensity there. To say 0, it means to say I don't have a craving. So for me, it makes good logic to say, okay, at a 10. And so what I'm looking at this is when someone has possibly an intensity of actually 70, I start to worry as a therapist, as a counselor, as someone that cares and concerns for my clients. I start to question the intensity and how well they're going to be managing this actually craving, because 70 or above, it's really up there, and I think that's what we have to start worrying about. Mm-hmm.
And that's a very good point. Managing the care for the actual craving itself, and monitoring where you're charting your cravings. If you chart and you're doing the intensity scale and you mark down, hey, this time I have a craving and it's at a 50. Then the next time you have a craving, hey, this time I have a craving and it's at a 65. Where's the management coming in? Marking down where your cravings are, landing them, and seeing how bad your cravings are can actually help you to manage and better minimize the cravings themselves, of realizing that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and making them go decrease.
That's a good point. And so now say your family member or yourself, and you come into a therapist or a counselor or a family, you say, you know what, Edgar, I'm having a craving of a 70. It's because I've been my conditional response, I've been around people, and this is what I'm doing to maintain it. I'm thinking about it. See how much more educated you are now, how more likely more likely are you to maintain your sobriety and your recovery, because you're aware of these things. And so one of the things to look at is you have to look at slight, moderately, and that's really extremely extreme when it comes to the intensity scale when it comes to craving. So one of the things I want to let you know, if I were you, I will start looking at 60 or above. But sometimes for me it's 70 or above where I start really concerned. So I'll give an example. I have a client that comes in and says, I ask him, how intense are you craving? Oh, Edgar, I'm like at a 30, 40. Okay, wonderful. So if life happens to that person once he leaves, they're at 30, maybe they get an argument with someone, maybe their craving increases to a 50. And then all of a sudden they get bad news and improves to a 70. Imagine if that person did not know that the level was at 30, they didn't do anything to bring it down to a 30, that intensive craving. They might get a negative emotion and shoots it up to 80, and all of a sudden, here it goes, I want to go use. So that's why it's really important to understand your intensity level. That way you could bring it back down. So if life happens, negative consequences or positive experience happens, you understand what your cravings are and you can manage it without no shame, guilt with it. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to understand how you are in this scale. It's really important to understand the intensity of this craving that you're having, because it will determine a factor. What's your been experience working with clients that are not aware of the intensity of the craving? How has it been for you?
Well, from my experience, the intensity of the cravings that aren't, when they're not aware of it, is the same thing. They go up, and then they don't focus on where they're at. They continuously move back up again, but at the same time, some of them will slide down, or they'll have a fight with their wife, and it'll shoot up even higher than where they were at. And instead of going up all the way to the top and using, sometimes they can catch themselves where they're at, and they can stop and say, "Hey, wait! I'm having too much of a craving, and I have to go back down. So let me take my time to manage myself and bring myself back down." So that's very important on managing the care and managing the cravings with the intensity scale and monitoring where you're at. You don't want to be so high. You want to be low at all times. If you continue to go up, 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 you are not going to be where you want to be.
And that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought the, continue to elaborate on that point, because it is true. What we're trying to do today is give everyone out there a really concrete understanding about what cravings are. Craving does not mean you failed in your program. Craving does not mean that you're going back into using. Craving means that you're having a symptom of your chronic illness, which is the substance use disorder or addiction. That's all that means. That is out of your control. You're having it. But it's really important to understand and acknowledge it. And like you have asthma, you need to know what your physical symptoms are to prevent them. If you're having high blood pressure, you need to learn how to monitor your blood, what sets your blood pressure to go high, because these are our chronic illnesses that we have. And same thing with craving. It's something that we need to look at as a symptom of part of this disease, this addiction of the brain.
It's definitely a symptom, it's definitely a part of the disease, and it's definitely part of the brain. It's very important to understand also, like you said, that cravings are a part of it, and cravings are going to happen. So not to be afraid of them, not to be shy about them, or to be closed off, but to be open about them, to embrace them, to explore them and see where they're at for yourself and for others around you that are experiencing you have a craving. So these are all things that want to be looked at so you can have a better understanding of what you're going through.
And one thing to understand is we don't want to say this, or maybe I'm speaking for myself, but one thing to look at is, doesn't mean you're going to have cravings every day. You might go weeks without a craving. You might have a craving once a month, once every few months, but a craving, it will happen. It's going to happen. And it's not a moral failing. It's not a lack of will. It has nothing to do with that. It just simply means that your brain, it has this symptom. And you have to look at this as something to consider and look at. If it just comes and it passes through, it just passes through. However, it's important to acknowledge that it's there and do something actively instead of going on automatic pilot and ignoring it and saying everything's okay when it's not okay. You could lie to your counselor, you could lie to your family member, you could lie to anyone else, but you can't lie to the person in the mirror, because the person in the mirror knows if you're having a craving or not. So today is really important to all of you out there understand that cravings are natural. They're going to happen when you're stressed, going to happen when early in recovery, later in recovery, they're going to happen. There's different types of cravings that you have to look at. We mentioned they have to do with withdrawal cravings, with people, pleasure, things you've been exposed to. The hedonic responses, feeling you want to feel yourself feel better. These are all type of cravings that you're going to have, and it's really, really important, and I really want to stress this out there to all of you. If you have a family member, ask them, did you have a craving today? How did you manage your craving? Is there anything I could do about this craving that you're having? Do not shame your loved one for having a craving. Just let them know that you are attempting to understand, attempting to help. And sometimes you don't even have to talk about the craving. Sometimes you just have to help them change their mind from in here to external and get them engaged in a different conversation. And don't be alarmed if your loved one who has an addiction has cravings. They're a natural process, they occur, and you want to ask what level of intensity they're having it. You also want to ask, how they're experiencing it, to describe it if they want to, and be there with them. Don't leave them out of your sight. Be there with them, encourage them, do something supportive, so that way you, with your social connection, you help them release dopamine. With the love and tenderness and care, you help them go through this, and they feel like they have someone there, because it's very easy for us to replace our relationships with drugs. It's important to us for us to replace the drugs with meaningful relationships, and that's what we're asking everyone today, to understand that cravings is something natural that your loved ones are going to have, that you as a person that might have an addiction problem or substance use disorder is going to have. So just understand that, and thank you, Romy, for being here with us today and helping me describe what cravings are. Thank you very much for watching us today, and just know that Crossroads Recovery Centers is a place where you actually talk to a professional and get an evaluation to get assisted more for how to manage your cravings or urges. You have a loved one that is going through some withdrawals. We also have detoxification, residential, and intensive outpatient, and outpatient, which means that you can live there, get treatment, or you can be at your home, go to work, and come get help to help you manage. And if you're not with us, I please urge you to visit a local treatment center or 12-step meetings to get your needs met and help those loved ones that you have to get the help.
I want to just remind everybody to go through and follow the charts. I mean, chart your intensity of the cravings, chart your triggers, chart your cues, chart your behaviors. Really try to manage what you're going through for your cravings. Know they're completely natural. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And remember, Crossroads Recovery Centers is always here to help you. So give us a call, go to our website, whatever it is that comes along for you, and we're here to help you.
You can visit us at crossroadsrecoverycenters.com for more information about our program, finances, everything that you need to know will be up there. If you want to watch this video, it will be loaded on there with previous videos. I want to thank Mr. Remy for being here with us today and provide us with his expertise of cravings and urges.
Pleasure.
You're very appreciated, and thank you everyone for watching. God bless.